Hi everyone, I'm Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials or nanoscience, who tweets from the Real Scientists Nano Twitter account, which is realsci_nano.
Hi everyone, my name is Pranoti, and today we have with us Becky Cummings, who is a PhD student at the University of Glasgow in Scotland. Hi Rebecca, how are you?
Good, how are you?
I am good, and after talking to you briefly about your research on this short podcast, now I'm ready to take a deeper dive with you into your research, you as a scientist, your wishes, and everything as much as possible. So let's start by understanding your career journey so far. So how did you end up as a PhD student in University of Glasgow? Please tell us.
So I was interested in physics from a very, very young age. My dad actually has a PhD in physics, although it was never like, it's not like he was like, you have to do what I do or anything like that. But I think I was quite aware of it from quite a young age because, he would talk to me about it and stuff. And then I did my undergraduate at the University of Kent in Canterbury in physics. And I did what we call an integrated master's in the UK. So it's a 4-year undergraduate degree. So I don't have a bachelor's degree, just have a master's. And in your final year, you do a research project. And in my 3rd year, I was actually doing study abroad. So I was like not in sync with the rest of my year group. And we got an email about picking our master's projects for 4th year. And I got it in the middle of some exams. And I was like, oh, I'll deal with it later. I got the reminder email on my finals, and I was like, oh, it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. So I just didn't pick my master's project because I was like, I like all areas. It'll be fine. And I got assigned to my supervisor, who's like a really great woman. And so I ended up doing a materials project for my master's project. And luckily, I really loved it. I really enjoyed materials. I really like how sort of interdisciplinary materials can be, so you're characterizing something, but it might be used for a different area of science. And that really, really appealed to me. And I feel very lucky that it kind of happened by accident. That I ended up in an area I really, really like. And then, I just kind of wanted to do a PhD. I didn't really want to go into the workforce or grad scheme or anything. So I kind of just applied to a few different places. And I got accepted at Glasgow, and I really liked the sound of the project. And it was I knew people who lived here as well, like school friends and stuff. So it seemed like a really sensible place to move to. And I really like it. I've really enjoyed being a PhD student in Glasgow. I really like my project. So that's how I ended up here.
That sounds amazing. So that's really cool. So you already spoke briefly about your current research in the short podcast. But where does it fit in this big picture of materials or nanoscience? Because materials and nanoscience, it's quite a broad field. So where does it fit? What you're doing right now, your current research, where does it fit in?
So EELS has made some electron energy loss spectroscopy has made some big steps in terms of sensitivity in the last 10 plus years. And it's sort of opened up things that weren't really possible previously. So what I do more specifically is absolute quantification with spatial resolution. So it's a sort of tying in different parts of the microscope into being able to count individual atoms in a material. And obviously that can be really helpful in a variety of different places. So I talked about how mostly I focus on gravitational wave materials. But one of my other projects was on zircaloy 4, which is used in nuclear reactor cladding. So it's, there's lots of different ways you could use this technique for lots of different materials. So it's more about the technique than perhaps the properties of the specific materials that you're looking at.
Okay, that sounds really interesting. So Also, from what you said, your master work was also quite interesting, and your current research is also very interesting. So, if I'm assuming that you're involved, you have been involved so far in different kinds of research projects, because oftentimes when you're doing a PhD, it's not just the PhD. There are always these branches or side projects or projects in parallel that you are working on. And this question, my next question, is quite a tough one, and I know this before asking. But if you have to pick one research project or experiment that you're proud of, or the most fun or quirky one, could you pick one and explain it to us in simple words in the section we call In Other Words?
So I kind of talked about it already. Honestly, like I think the project I'm probably most proud of is turning some of that early work in terms of counting the individual argon atoms, specifically in the tantalum pentoxide, and turn that into a first author paper in 2020. So it was a really rough year, right, for everyone. So I think it's not necessarily like turn that into a paper during like what was a very difficult year, and like being able to slightly adjust. I think my project would have been more just gravitational wave coatings if it weren't for the pandemic. Working on the nuclear stuff was partly because of like it was data that we had available. But yeah, so it is the counting of the argon bubbles in the gravitational wave detector coatings, and it is quite cool to be able to look at an image and be like, you can count like there are 10 atoms of argon in that pixel. And that's like an incredibly small, incredibly sensitive, and being able to look at that small bubble and be able to calculate like its density and its pressure, and knowing that stuff will feed into making the detector more sensitive. And then also all of that being cool and turning it into a paper. I think perhaps not my most coherent answer, but it's sort of the combination of it being very sensitive, which being very cool, and then turning it into the paper. Yeah.
That sounds like a really cool. I can understand why you picked this as the project, one of the research projects that you're most proud of. Let's put it that way. We don't want to play favorites here, but this is just one of them. Because it does sound cool, like being able to count the number of argon atoms. I mean, this is quite a nightmare, I presume, in a detector, and we want it to be as sensitive as possible. In order for that, we want as less argon atoms or any other kind of impurities absorbed in these layers. So it has a very big impact, I feel, on the work that is going on with the gravitational wave detectors. Am I saying it correctly?
Yep, gravitational detectors.
That sounds amazing. So, Rebecca, it's quite clear to me from talking to you now that you really love the research aspect of being a scientist. But there are other parts or other tasks or the things that one needs to do in addition to the research while being a scientist. So, what else do you like about being a scientist?
Well, I like that it's so collaborative. You know, I think quite lucky you sort of work with lots of different people who have slightly different specialities. And I like, you know, sort of working with, you know, you're in Germany, I'm in the UK, we're still like having conversation. You know, I really enjoy that part. And then also I really, really enjoy outreach stuff. You know, I've really enjoyed being part of that. I did a tiny bit in undergraduate, but not anything sort of particularly notable. But I got quite involved with it in Glasgow. And I think it's really cool being able to go out to schools. I remember those kind of events of things that I really enjoyed when I was in school, you know, sort of getting to hear about people at university doing research, or like some of the real life applications of the stuff we were learning, and being able to see how it's actually beneficial or important. So I really enjoy doing that as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's very collaborative. And that is something I definitely miss from my past life being a scientist. I mean, my current work is also very collaborative, but this added science angle just makes it so much more exciting and thrilling. And I remember that. So I totally understand that we are on the same page here. Um, Rebecca, it sounds to me that you have quite a lot of experience of being a scientist, and you have a long way to go. Of course, I'm not saying that this is you have arrived. I mean, in some ways you have. So, if you were to start now your scientific journey, what advice would you give yourself, or if you were to go back in time, what advice would you give to the Becky back in the day? That hey, just be mindful of these things if you want to be a scientist.
I think I would emphasize more my filing system and making sure, because I'm starting to write up my thesis. So like going back to find stuff from first year, it is there, but it's not all in like super logical places. So I think I would really emphasize keeping good records of where stuff is and making a sensible filing system. But I think more generally, it's just, it's the stuff you hear a lot. And I think it's easy just to kind of write it off as cliched, but like, there's a reason people say it a lot. It's like not being scared to ask questions, you know, that kind of stuff. I think you can be a bit worried that everyone else around you knows a lot more than you do. But it's only because they've been there a bit longer. It's not like they were better at, you know, when they were at your stage or anything. And I think also it's sometimes easy to feel like you haven't achieved much if you spent the day, you know, if you're working on a program or some particularly difficult data, and you can kind of come away at the end of a day or end of a week or even longer sometimes, and you feel like I have nothing to show. So like I have been working, but I don't have anything to show. The science is just kind of like that sometimes, you know. It's learning to be, and I'm not saying I'm still good at, I still struggle with it, but like learning to accept that sometimes you may not have something physical to show, but it doesn't mean that you have like wasted your time or you haven't been working, that kind of thing.
Right. Absolutely. Wow, you're so mature. Oh my God. I wish I had that maturity when I was still doing my PhD, because this all sounds so amazing. Oh my God. Yeah. Especially with the filing system. I cursed myself so much for calling samples or files test 1, test 0.5 or whatever. This naming and this filing, no, having multiple like information spread across, and like, what was I thinking? Oh my God, absolutely. And also everything else that you mentioned, all your advice. I hope you share all of this also when you're taking over the Twitter account, because it is very valuable pieces of advice that you just shared. Well, Rebecca, it sounds to me that now you're like, also so far your research experience has been wonderful, and I hope it will continue to be wonderful in the future as well. However, if you had 3 wishes to improve your research experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here, okay?
I think for me the obvious one is that it's not really, I would really have liked it for the pandemic to have not happened.
Really?
You know.
No way. Really? No, don't.
Yeah, I know, it's shocking. Not just
Got a
like
paper in 2020, so
true. You know, like for all the obvious reasons, but also like I haven't really been to any in-person conferences during my PhD. I was we were talking about me maybe doing a research placement with like one of our collaborators at the end of 2020. And then obviously that just also never happened. You know, and I think it would have been nice to sort of have that typical PhD student experience of being able to go to conferences and stuff. But there, you know, like you said, I did the paper, I did FameLab, which we talked a bit, not on the call. And I'm not sure I would necessarily have done that if I hadn't, you know, if it weren't the pandemic or whatever. So, you know, there's good parts, and then also I would like there not to be publishing fees for journals. I think that would be nice. Not having to pay the open access fee and it just be open access. I think that would be nice. Would be my big wish.
that makes sense. That makes complete sense. I hope you have the typical PhD experience, going to conferences and placements and stuff while you're doing a PhD, or if you do decide to do a postdoc and stay in research, I hope you get to experience all of that, because it's a pity that because of the pandemic, a lot of PhD students or master students didn't really get that exposure, because that's also very, very important. But of course, as you found different ways like FameLab or getting the paper published and all of that, so that worked out quite well. And with the journal fees, yeah, I hope we are working towards it. I feel like we are, but there's a long way to go. As a feeling, but I feel like we are getting there somehow. Do you have a third wish? You can always ask for a coffee machine. That is also, we have had guests who are like, it would be nice to have a coffee machine, or some money for myself, or like something like that. Anything.
Oh, I don't know.
A cookie dispenser, a biscuit dispenser.
Yeah, that might be nice. Maybe maybe we used to have a coffee machine and then someone took it with them after the pandemic. So maybe having maybe having it back.
That is so evil to take away the coffee machine from scientists. Like, oh my God, what a horrible person that is. I hope they have a good reason for depriving you all of coffee during work.
There's lots of lovely coffee shops near the university, so it's kind of nice to have an excuse to go for a little walk and get some anyway. So yeah, maybe someone who just give me coffee, go to the coffee shop and be like, here, Becky, you can just have the coffee. You don't have to buy it every time.
Yeah, I hope all three wishes of yours will happen. They will come to life sometime soon, especially the first one with experiencing conferences and going for placement and spending time in collaborators lab. Because I think I did that during my PhD and it was a really, really interesting experience for me. I got to learn a lot. The work culture is so different. It's just amazing. It's a very, very enriching experience. I hope you get to do that. I hope you get to experience it. And the open access, well, it might not happen in the short term, but hopefully in the long term, in our lifetime, so to say, we make a huge progress. I hope that. And I hope you get the coffee without having to pay for it. A good coffee, because that's very, very important. Rebecca, this has been wonderful, but before I let you go, I have one last question for you, and that is about the pandemic and your learnings from the pandemic, which started in 2020. So please share your learnings from the difficult times, which seem to be stretching on and on.
Yeah, I think it's mostly things won't look like you expect them to. And I think that's probably true even outside of the pandemic, that lots of people, their project doesn't look exactly like you thought it was going to when you signed on for it. You know, there might be little changes to it, but I think especially for like my cohort and people like just either side of me, it's particularly true. And it's just about being able to be okay with that things won't look like you're expecting them to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that things are worse. Obviously being in the pandemic has been worse. I'm not saying that, but I mean, like, in terms of your research, it doesn't necessarily mean that like your project is worse off or like you're worse off as a researcher. Yeah.
All right. Okay, that makes sense. Those are very. You are so wise. Oh my God, I am so impressed.
Don't say it.
Well, this has been lovely. Thank you very much for speaking with me, and really, really looking forward to having you on Real Scientist Nano. Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. This is Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. To know more about us, visit our website, thesciencetalk.com, and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.